The Rambam tells us in Mitzvah 158 that there's a mitzvah on Pesach to eat matzah. And only the first night of Pesach do we have the obligation to eat matzah. Only at the Seder. One Seder in Israel, and outside of Israel, 2 Seders. But during the days of Pesach, the subsequent days of Pesach, there is no obligation to eat matzah. This is the pshat, this is the basic mitzvah of eating of matzah. What is the remez? What is the hint? Our rabbis tell us that chametz, levin, which is prohibited on Passover, represents the ego. Just like the leaven rises, so too one's ego rises. Similarly, the ego comes from and stems from the Yetzer Hara, the evil inclination. When Mashiach will come, we are told that God will slaughter the Yetzer Hara. He will slaughter the evil inclination. And the question is, why does it say He's going to slaughter the evil inclination? Why doesn't it say simply that God will kill the evil inclination? Why the word shecht? And the answer is, Ein v'shachad elo mashach. The Baal Shem Tov tells us that the concept of slaughtering means to elevate. When we slaughter an animal in general, we elevate the animal from the potential of animal to the potential of human. And now, when you make a bracha on the animal, you elevate the meat and the flesh and the energy to the level of a human being. And similarly here, the idea of slaughtering the Yetzer Hara means that the Yetzer Hara will be elevated to a new position and will be given new status. Because in essence, the Yetzer Hara was not bad. He came to trick us, to challenge us, to bring out our potential. But really the Yetzer Hara himself is not evil. And this is the concept of chametz. And that is to remove the ego and to become subservient to the will of God. What is drush, homiletics? We find that the Alter Rebbe writes in his Tshuvos, in his responsa, that on Pesach, even though according to halacha, one is allowed to put matzah into water, or allowed to dip matzah into the soup, or one is allowed to have matzah balls on Passover, he goes on to say, Hamachmir Tovi alav bracha. One who is stringent and does not put matzah into the soup on Passover, that person should be blessed. Why? Because it's possible. And again, a very small, remote possibility that there may be one piece of flour that was not totally baked. And now you have the matzah, and on the matzah you have that little piece of flour, and now you put the piece of flour into the soup and you cook it up. By doing so, that turns into chametz. Even though it's not probable, but it is a possibility. So therefore, one who's stringent on Passover, not to eat gebraks, tovei alav bracha, that person deserves to be blessed. However, he concludes that on the last day of Passover, then already because of Simchas Yom Tif, because of the joy of the holiday, one can eat gebraks. And we find that this was the custom of the Frierdiker Rebbe, the Rayatz, Rabbi Yosef Yitzchak Schneerson, the 6th Rebbe of Chabad, that the first 6-7 days of Passover, he was very, very stringent. The matzah was always covered. He was always careful that even one crumb should not fall into the soup or into the fish, etc., etc. However, when it came to the last day, the final day of Pesach, known as Acharon Shel Pesach, he would put the matzah into everything, into the fish, into the wine, into the soup, into the meat. Every meal and every dish and every vessel had within it matzah. And the question is, what is this polar opposite? What happened here on the last day of Pesach? On one hand, the first days he did not put the matzah into liquid. On the final day he did. And the answer is, as we mentioned earlier, that the concept of chametz, the concept of levin, alludes to the ego. When it comes to ego, God says, Ein ani v'hu yochelim ladir sham. I and the egotist cannot live in the same world together. The world just ain't big enough for the both of us. If someone is so egotistic, he's greater than God. He does not need God, God forbid. The holiday of Passover teaches us the quality of humility. And therefore, by eating the matzah for 7 days, this alludes to every day of the week, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and Shabbos. We now inculcated into our psyche, into our minds, and into our hearts the quality of bittul, the quality of self-nullification for every single Sunday of the year, and every Monday of the year, and every Tuesday of the year, etc. Now that I already accomplished, that I transformed all the days of my week, which alludes to all of my 7 emotions. Chesed is Sunday, or Sunday is kindness, and Monday is gevura, severity, etc., etc. Now that I transformed all the days of the week, all my 7 emotions, now, on the contrary, I could have chametz, so to speak. Throughout the rest of the year, I'm allowed to eat chametz. Because now I transform the ego of the Yetzer Hara, of the evil inclination, and I use this haughtiness for positive things. As it says, Vayigba libe b'darkei Hashem, that he lifted up his heart in the service of God. Not to be shy and not to be embarrassed of your service to God, but to be able to go out into the street with a yarmulke and to have a mezuzah on your front door and not to be intimidated by your neighbors. So ego, in essence, if it's used in a positive way, could be very beneficial. So first we have to transform it for the first 7 days of Pesach, and then after Pesach, once again we are allowed to resume to eat this chametz. And therefore on the last day of Pesach, here in America, which is the 8th day, or in Israel, which is the 7th day, we're allowed to take the matzah and put it into liquid, because we're no longer concerned that, God forbid, this matzah has on it a piece of flour that can bring us to the level of ego. Because by now, for sure, this was already transformed. And therefore, on the final day of Passover, we show that no doubt we have transformed our ego, and therefore we have the ability to take the matzah and put it into the soup and put it into the fish, and yet we are not going to be affected by it in any way. This is the concept of drush, of the homiletics pertaining to the matzah. What is the soid? What is the esoteric level of matzah? We find, interestingly, that there are 2 passages that talk about matzah. In truth, there are many more than 2 passages, but 2 passages that seem to be contradictory. On one hand, it says, in this week's parsha, in chapter 12, verse number 18, over there it says, Be'erev teichlu matzos. So in the evening shall you eat matzahs. And there, the word matzos is written without the letter vav. It's missing the letter vav. We find another pasuk in the same parsha, in chapter 12, verse number 39, and over there it says, Vayoifu ugeis matzos. It says over there, and they baked cakes of matzos. And over there, matzos does have the letter vav. So why in one place does matzos have the letter vav, and why in another place does the matzos not have the letter vav? And the answer is, as the Alter Rebbe writes in Likutei Torah, that the first matzos was before midnight. The second matzos was eaten after midnight. In other words, God told the Jews to eat matzah and have a seder the night of Pesach, the night that they were going to be redeemed from the land of Egypt. And over there, the first time they ate matzos, it was without the vav. However, after 12 o'clock, after God came down into Egypt, and he smote the firstborns, and he spared the Jewish people. And there was the revelation of God himself. Now there was a vav in the matzahs. The letter vav alluding to a revelation from above to below, a pillar of fire, a pillar of godliness, or a tract of revelation that came and entered into the world. And that is why the first matzah is missing the vav, and the second matzah has the letter vav. Now this explains a very interesting piece of the Haggadah. In the Haggadah we read, it says, Matzah zoi, why do we eat matzah? Al shum shalei hispik b'tzeker shalaviseinu lahachmetz. Because of the fact that the dough of our forefathers never had chance to rise, it never became chametz, until God revealed himself to them and redeemed them from the land of Egypt. Shenemar, as it says, Vayoifu es habosek asher eitziu mimitzrayim ugois matzos. And it quotes from this passage. It says they baked the cakes of bread, they baked the dough that they took out with them from Egypt, because it was not chametz. Why? Because the Egyptians drove us out of Mitzrayim. And they had no time to wait for it to rise, and therefore we have matzah. This concept of going out of Egypt and being driven out of Egypt and rushing out of Egypt happened the next day. It wasn't the night of the Seder. The night of the Seder we prepared the matzah. So why do we eat matzah tonight at the Seder? Because when we left Egypt, we had no time to allow the dough to rise. It makes no sense. We eat matzah because God commanded us tonight of Passover, have a Paschal lamb, have a matzah, have maror, make a Seder in Egypt. That's why we eat matzah. However, based on the Soid, what the Alter Rebbe writes in L'Kutei Torah, it makes sense. The matzah before 12 o'clock that we ate, yes, we were commanded by God to eat it, but it was matzah without a vav. It was a matzah before God's revelation. The matzah that we ate the following day when we left Egypt, this was matzah with a vav, after God revealed himself. It was a greater revelation of matzah. Therefore comes the Haggadah, the author of the Haggadah, and says, you should know, even though we're eating matzah tonight, the eve of the 15th, before God, so to speak, revealed himself, you should know we have the advantages and the blessings and the energy of the matzah that we ate after God revealed himself. And therefore our matzah is really the matzah with the vav. We already have the vav in our matzah. We already have the vav in this food. And therefore we understand why matzah is so powerful. It has the power to heal and the power to give faith, because this is the matzah that we eat after God revealed himself. What does Chassidus say? Chassidus says like this. There are two types of matzah. There's matzah ashira, there is rich matzah, and there's a matzah which is lechem oini, poor man's bread, poor matzah. What's the difference? The code of Jewish law, it says that the matzah that we eat for the Seder has to be lechem oini. It has to be poor man's bread. Literally, you have to put flour and water into the matzah. That's it. No salt, no pepper, no sugar, no honey, no flavors. It has to be simple, poor man's bread. What is matzah ashira? What is rich matzah? This is matzah that is made with wine, or matzah that is made with honey, or matzah that is made with oil. Such matzah that has no water but is made only with wine or oil or honey cannot become chametz, cannot rise. Only matzah, which is made with water, can rise. And we are told when it comes to the Seder, you have to eat lechem oini, you have to eat the poor man's bread. And the question is why? Furthermore, we find an interesting contrast between the matzah we eat tonight at the Seder, nowadays, and the matzah that the Jews actually ate the night of the Seder in the land of Egypt. If you look into the Torah, in the portion of Re'eh, it says over there, Shivas Yomim Teichal Olav Matzah is Lechem Oini. It says, for 7 days, you shall eat the matzah of a poor man. Why? Because with haste we ran out of the land of Egypt. And by doing so, Leman Tizker, we shall remember the going out of Mitzrayim, the going out of Egypt all the days of our life. This is a commandment that Moses commands the Jewish people when they go into the land of Israel to remember to eat matzah every year on Pesach and to make sure it's lechem oini. However, we don't find that when the Jews were in Mitzrayim that the Torah uses the terminology of lechem oini, poor man's bread. It says, God tells them, eat matzah. It could have been rich man's bread. So why is it when they were in Mitzrayim, they ate rich man's bread, and now we eat poor man's bread? What's the difference between rich man's bread and poor man's bread? And Chassidus says that the basic difference between rich man's bread and poor man's bread, or matzah, which is lechem oini, or matzah that is called matzah ashira, is as follows. The idea of poor alludes to the concept of kabbalas oil, alludes to the concept of accepting the yoke of God upon yourself. What does that mean? That means when a Jew does a mitzvah without a gishmak, he does a mitzvah without passion, he does a mitzvah without pleasure, he does a mitzvah without any enjoyment. Why? Because simply he doesn't understand why he's doing the mitzvah. He doesn't logically appreciate the fulfillment of the mitzvah. So he's not doing it because of his understanding and his emotion. Really, based on his understanding and his emotion, perhaps he would rather do something else. But he has kabbalas oil. He accepts the yoke of God, so therefore he does it. That is called kabbalas oil, accepting the yoke of God upon yourself, which is represented through the poor man's bread that has no taste. There's no pleasure eating that bread. Matzah ashira, rich man's matzah that has a taste, represents a yid, a person who does a mitzvah with an understanding. And he has an enjoyment to do the mitzvah. And he has logic behind the mitzvah. Just like this matzah has in it oil and wine and honey, so too it has a taste. He does mitzvah with pleasure. When you have matzah, which is made out of honey, or matzah, which is made out of wine, we said earlier, it cannot become chametz. In other words, a person who serves God intellectually and emotionally, he has come to the realization and come to the conclusion that this is truly the path in which he wants to lead. He cannot come to chametz, he cannot come to ego, he cannot come to sin. Because it's not that he's fighting with his evil inclination. He already conquered it. He has chosen this path. He wants to do it. No one is telling him that he has to do it. He voluntarily loves doing it. In Hasidic terms, these two paths are called the path of iskafia and the path of ishapcha. Iskafia means you have to fight the animal soul. You have to subjugate it. You have to coerce it, which is similar to poor man's matzah. And then you have ishapcha, transformation, which is the matzah of a rich man. It's already transformed. These two matzah represent the two basic redemptions of the Jewish people. The first redemption, the redemption of going out of Egypt, and then the final redemption, the leaving of this exile with the coming of Mashiach. What are we told? We're told when it came to going out of Egypt, it says, Ki barach ha'am, that the Jewish people ran away. They fled. Why did they flee? Because when you like something and you know it's bad for you, you have to run away. So they were in Egypt 210 years, and they saw the culture, and they saw the science, and they saw the brilliance. And they, on one hand, really liked it. On the other hand, they knew it was wrong. So they had to run away from it, because if they would stay there a little longer, they would be totally taken over by Egypt. And therefore they had to run away. This is the famous adage or terminology: you can take a Jew out of Egypt, but you can't take the Egypt out of a Jew. And therefore, today, when we sit at the Pesach Seder, when we are reminded of going out of Egypt, we have to eat lechem oini, we have to eat poor man's matzah, because to remind ourselves that we still have evil within us, and that we have to run away from that evil, and we have to have iskafia. We have to coerce and subjugate that evil. However, Isaiah tells us in Isaiah 52, pertaining to the future redemption, they will not run out in haste. When Mashiach will come, we're not going to run out of exile, we're going to walk out of exile without any regrets, because we are going to realize that exile is constraints. We're going to realize that exile is all about borders. We're going to realize that exile is all about limitations. And if we truly want to live a life of expansiveness, then we want to go into this phase, into this state of redemption. And therefore, the matzah of Ashira, the rich man matzah, alludes to the future redemption. Now, when the Jews were in Egypt, they ate rich man's bread. They ate the rich man's matzah. Why? For at the beginning of the first redemption, already they were told, already they had a taste of the future redemption. How it's going to be when they're going to leave this final redemption. And by doing so, they keep the goal in mind, that we have to reach this level of transformation. But in the meantime, now every year, when we do the mitzvah of Pesach, we have to realize that unfortunately we are still in exile, and we still have to battle with the evil, we have to battle with the ego, and therefore it must be transformed. And to remind us of this, we eat the poor man's bread. However, there's another reason why we eat the poor man's bread. Not only does the poor man's bread allude to our present spiritual state, that we are poor in the sense that we still have to grapple and struggle with the animal soul, but even after Mashiach comes and we leave this exile, and technically we will be on the level of Matzah Ashira, the rich man's bread, the rich man's matzah. It says in the verse that we said earlier, we should remember the going out of Egypt all the days of our life. All the days allude even after Mashiach comes. Even after Mashiach comes, we're still going to remember the exodus from Egypt. Why? Seemingly the miracles that will take place when Mashiach will come will be so much greater than the miracles that we perceived and that we witnessed and that we experienced when we left the land of Egypt. So why would we even think about reminding ourselves of the days when we left the land of Egypt? If now we have Mashiach, now we have Geula, now we have redemption, we already conquered the animal soul, why should we have to think about the going out of Egypt many years earlier? And the answer is that even though transformation is the ultimate level, even though the rich man's bread is something that we truly desire, However, even after the coming of Mashiach, we will still remember the going out of Egypt. Why? Because Torah demands of a Jew constant struggle, constant ascent. We should never be happy on the level that we find ourselves, even if that is a very lofty level, even when we transform the animal soul. And the animal soul, logically and emotionally, is consistent with Torah and Yiddishkeit, and there's no longer a battle, comes along the Torah and says, remember the going out of Egypt, remember that battle. We should continue to struggle and to strive for higher revelations. We should continue to struggle and strive for higher connections, and to have more intellect, and to do more good deeds, and to truly connect ourselves to God on a deeper level. Talking about Matzah, one of the famous mitzvahs that are connected with Pesach is the mitzvah to give money to the poor. In the Code of Jewish Law, when we talk about Pesach, the first thing they talk about is how it's important for every community to set up a fund to give money for poor people to have matzah for Pesach. And from here we derive for every other holiday and every other Shabbos and every other day of the week. But we start with Passover. So there's a story told that a poor man once came to the Avraham of Briske, the famous rabbi of Brisk. And Avraham of Briske used to give out money for every person that came to him before Passover. This fellow came over to Rab Chaim and said, Rabbi, I have a question for you. Can you use milk instead of the 4 cups of wine? Can I drink 4 cups of milk instead of 4 cups of wine on the Pesach Seder? When Rab Chaim Brisker heard this question, he gave this man double the money. So the man leaves, and his wife turns to him and says, I don't understand you. You gave him double the money of everybody else. Why? He says, very, very simple. You have to listen to his question. If he's asking to be able to drink milk instead of wine, it means he has no money to buy meat. So not only do I have to give him money to buy matzah, but I also have to give him money to be able to buy meat. I also believe that one of the reasons why we call matzah lechem oini, poor man's bread, is because after you spend money on the real good shmura matzah, you taka become poor. $20, $30 a pound is a lot of money. If you have a big family, you can hire 10, 12 children, and you eat shmura matzah the whole holiday, it's truly lechem oini, it's poor man's bread. So we hope and pray that by following the laws of the Torah, and by truly eating the matzah and drinking the wine, we will celebrate this year, L'Shana Haba B'Yerushalayim, this year in Jerusalem, together with Mashiach, and not only to eat the lechem oini, the poor man's bread, but truly to eat the lechem ashira, the bread of a rich man, rich in Torah and rich in mitzvahs, with the coming of Mashiach speedily in our days.